Michael Jackson set down his microphone mid-sentence and walked away from 72,000 screaming fans at Wembley Stadium. Thousands of camera flashes froze in an instant. 72,000 people held their breath. Wembley was suddenly buried in silence. The arena fell into stunned silence as the king of pop disappeared backstage. But what happened next would define his true legacy and prove that the greatest performances aren't always on stage. It was July 16, 1988. Michael Jackson had just electrified Wembley Stadium with Smooth Criminal and Beat It. Sweat glistened on his sequin jacket as he moved with that supernatural grace that had made him the most famous person on earth. The Bad World Tour was at its absolute peak, and 72,000 fans were witnessing what many would later call the greatest performance of his career. But as Michael prepared for his next song, something unprecedented happened that no one in that massive stadium could have anticipated. Instead of launching into Billie Jean, Michael walked to the front of the stage, his famous white glove catching the spotlights. He raised his hand for silence and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's show will continue in a few hours. There's somewhere I need to be first. The crowd erupted in confusion. Voices rose in bewilderment. Michael Jackson had never postponed a concert mid-show in his entire career. Security teams scrambled across the stage. Fans shouted questions from the audience, and the media went into complete overdrive. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as reporters desperately tried to understand what was happening. What could possibly be more important than performing for 72,000 people who had paid to see the world's biggest star? If you want to be among the first to learn about unforgettable stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because what I'm about to tell you changed Michael Jackson's true legacy forever. No one knew. Even security was confused. But in Michael's heart, a completely different kind of concert had begun. Earlier that week, Michael's team had arranged something far more meaningful than any concert. Prince Charles and Princess Diana had personally invited him to visit Great Ormond Street Hospital, London's most prestigious children's hospital. But this wasn't going to be a typical celebrity photo opportunity with cameras and staged moments. This was something deeply personal. But here's the incredible part of this story that no one expected, the part that would change everything. 7-year-old Sophie Henderson had been fighting leukemia for 18 long months. The little girl from Manchester had been transferred to Great Ormond Street Hospital because her condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her small body was losing the battle against the disease that was slowly taking her life. Her parents, Margaret and David Henderson, had been told by doctors to prepare for the worst possible outcome. Sophie had one obsession that kept her spirits alive during the painful chemotherapy sessions that left her weak and nauseous: Michael Jackson. Her hospital room was completely covered with his posters, magazine cutouts, and album covers. Even when she was too weak to speak, when the cancer treatments left her barely conscious, the nurses would play Man in the Mirror softly through her headphones to comfort her during the darkest moments. When Sophie learned that Michael Jackson was actually coming to the hospital, she whispered to her mother with what little strength she had left, "Mummy, if I meet Michael Jackson, I won't be scared anymore. I'll be brave like him." When Michael arrived at Great Ormond Street Hospital that evening, he wasn't accompanied by the usual entourage of publicists, photographers, and security personnel that followed him everywhere. Instead, he came quietly, dressed simply in regular clothes, carrying a large bag filled with gifts he had personally selected from toy stores across London. Princess Diana was already there, having spent the entire afternoon with the children, reading stories and bringing smiles to faces that had seen too much pain. When she saw Michael arrive through the hospital's main entrance, she approached him and said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "Michael, these children don't need the king of pop tonight. They need Michael the person. They need your heart, not your fame." As Michael walked through the hospital corridors, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors, he stopped at every single room. He spoke with parents whose eyes were red from crying. He held tiny hands that were fighting battles no child should ever face, and he brought genuine smiles to faces that had forgotten how to hope. But when he reached the Peter Pan ward, named after the character he had always dreamed of portraying in film, he found Sophie Henderson lying in bed number 7. The little girl was so weak she could barely lift her head from the pillow. But when she saw Michael Jackson standing in her doorway like a figure from her dreams, her eyes filled with a light her parents hadn't seen in months. It was as if someone had turned on a switch inside her soul. Minutes passed. Hours passed back at Wembley. People began to worry. Some fans began to leave, but most stayed. But no one left completely, because everyone knew Michael would return. But they had no idea where their hero had gone or why. The arena back at Wembley was still waiting, but Michael Jackson had found something infinitely more important than any show. Michael sat beside Sophie's hospital bed and did something he rarely did in public. He slowly removed his famous white glove, the one that had become his trademark around the world, and took her small, frail hand in his bare hands. "Hello, beautiful," he whispered, his voice gentle and warm. "I hear you've been incredibly brave. Braver than anyone I know." Sophie, barely able to speak above a whisper, managed to say, "Michael, I love your songs so much. They make me feel better when I'm scared and when the medicine makes me sick. Your voice makes the pain go away." What happened next moved everyone in the room to tears. Doctors stopped their rounds, nurses gathered in the doorway, and parents from other rooms quietly approached to witness something extraordinary. Michael began singing "You're Not Alone," but this wasn't the polished, produced version the world knew from his albums. This was raw, intimate, unfiltered, a lullaby sung by one human being to another who desperately needed hope. As his voice filled the small hospital room, something miraculous occurred. Sophie began to smile, the first genuine smile her parents had seen in weeks. Her eyes brightened, as if the music was literally bringing life back into her weakened body. Then, in her weak little voice, she began singing along with him, word for word. One child got up from their bed, then another. A young boy with bandages covering his head appeared in the doorway. Then a girl with crutches hobbled over. The corridor filled with Michael's voice. Within a few minutes, the entire hospital was singing along with Michael. Before long, the entire ward was filled with children and their families, all singing together in perfect harmony. It was like a choir of angels, voices raised in hope and healing. Prince Charles and Princess Diana, who had been watching from the corridor with tears streaming down their faces, were deeply moved by what they witnessed. Charles later said it was one of the most genuine displays of compassion and humanity he had ever seen in his life. Diana, who would become patron of the hospital the following year, whispered to Michael, "This is why you're truly the king. Not because of your fame or your music, but because of your heart." Michael then did something that shocked everyone present. He pulled out his personal checkbook and wrote a check for £450,000, £150,000 for the Prince's Trust, and £300,000 specifically for Great Ormond Street Hospital. But he didn't stop there. He removed his iconic sequin jacket, the same one he had worn in countless performances around the world, the one that had become as famous as the man himself, and placed it gently over Sophie's thin shoulders. "This is for you," he said, his eyes filled with tears. "So you remember that you're the strongest person I've ever met. Stronger than any performer, stronger than any king." 3 hours later, Michael Jackson returned to Wembley Stadium. The 72,000 fans who had waited in confusion and concern didn't boo or complain when they saw him walk back onto the stage. Instead, when he explained where he had been and why he had left them, they erupted in thunderous applause that lasted for 5 full minutes, echoing through the stadium like rolling thunder. That night's performance was completely different from any concert Michael had ever given. He dedicated every single song to the children who remind us what's truly important in this world. He wore a simple black jacket instead of his elaborate costumes, and there was something more authentic, more deeply human about his performance. The songs carried more weight, more meaning, more soul. But the most incredible part of this story was yet to come, the part that would prove miracles really do happen. Sophie Henderson's condition began to improve dramatically after Michael's visit. Her white blood cell counts started rising, her appetite returned, and she began responding to treatments that had previously failed. Her doctors couldn't explain it medically, but her parents knew exactly what had happened. Sophie had found her reason to fight, her reason to live. Over the next 2 years, Michael maintained a deeply personal relationship with Sophie and her family. He would call her every few weeks to check on her progress, send personal messages and gifts, and whenever he toured anywhere in the United Kingdom, Sophie and her family received VIP tickets and backstage passes. In 1990, Sophie Henderson was officially declared cancer-free by her medical team. She was one of the special guests at Michael's Dangerous World Tour premiere in London, wearing the same sequin jacket he had given her in the hospital, now carefully tailored to fit her healthy, growing body. She danced in the audience as Michael performed, her joy radiating throughout the entire venue. Great Ormond Street Hospital staff said that Michael's visit changed everything about how they approach patient care. He had shown them that genuine compassion and human connection were more powerful than any medicine in their arsenal. Following his visit, the hospital received an unprecedented amount of donations and volunteer support from people inspired by his example. Michael continued to support Great Ormond Street Hospital quietly and consistently for the rest of his life. Every time he performed in London, he would visit the hospital without fanfare or media attention, bringing gifts, hope, and most importantly, his time and genuine presence to children who needed it most. Today, there's a small brass plaque in the Peter Pan ward that reads, "In memory of those who give their time, their hearts, and their hope to children in need." July 16th, 1988. Every major artist who performs at venues near London is shown this plaque and told the story of what real stardom looks like. Sophie Henderson, now a successful pediatric nurse, works at the same hospital where she was once a patient fighting for her life. She often tells her young patients about the night the king of pop taught her that music, love, and hope are the most powerful medicines in the world. She still has Michael's sequin jacket, carefully preserved, and sometimes she shows it to children who are going through their own battles. Michael Jackson could have easily finished his concert that night and fulfilled his royal obligation the next day during normal visiting hours. Instead, he chose to prioritize sick children over 72,000 paying fans who had spent their hard-earned money to see him perform. He understood something that many celebrities never learn, that true royalty isn't measured by crowns, ticket sales, or chart positions, but by the courage to put humanity before personal success. The story of July 16th, 1988, reminds us that the greatest performances aren't always on stage under bright lights with thousands of screaming fans. Sometimes they happen in quiet hospital rooms, where one person's kindness and genuine compassion can literally save a life and restore hope to an entire family. Princess Diana later said, "Michael showed us all what it truly means to be royal, not by ruling over people or commanding their attention, but by serving those who need us most and using our gifts to heal rather than simply entertain." Michael's most unforgettable concert at Wembley was never actually recorded. That night, the real stage was set up in a hospital room, and the audience of one 7-year-old girl received a performance that saved her life and changed the world's understanding of what it means to be truly great. Subscribe and share this story of compassion that reminds us music's true power lies not in entertainment, but in healing human hearts and bringing hope to those who need it most. Have you ever witnessed someone put others before their own success? Share your stories in the comments below, and let's celebrate the heroes who choose humanity over fame. This content is based on documented historical events and combines factual information with narrative storytelling for educational and inspirational purposes.